coming from Evansville, Indiana today to share her expertise with us on a journey of growth with her organization. So I'd like to welcome Jean Reising, who is a process improvement manager for Metronet, a high-speed fiber internet company based in Evansville, Indiana. An Indiana native, Jean graduated from the University of Evansville with a Bachelor's of Science in Organizational Leadership. She currently holds both a Six Sigma Black Belt and a Project Management Professional Certification, and she's going to take this time with us to share her journey of improvement, innovation, and how technology has played a role in her journey. So Jean, it's wonderful to have you with us. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your expertise with our global audience today.
Well, thank you, Josette. I am excited to be here, and we're going to talk about portfolio management in a growing company. We're trying to make change stick. That is going to be the theme for today. Our agenda is going to be focused on breaking down silos, the power of the process, managing competing priorities, and making real change. So what is a portfolio? Well, a portfolio, it ensures that the projects are monitored and measured and to bring about the expected results. It takes both projects by themselves and programs, combines them together, and aligns them with your business goals. There is no set number of projects in a portfolio, and it is different from a program because a program is more theme focused. So it could be that your IT department has several projects, but their projects are more IT themed, where a portfolio usually spans the entire business, several departments, and has different objectives that are aligned with the overall business goals for the year. It solves many different problems within the organization and make sure that each of your projects have executive support, that your projects have been evaluated, and that you have defined solutions for each of them going forward. So Alfred North Whitehead said, the art of progress is to preserve order amid change and to preserve change amid order. In my career, I've spent several years leading teams in very growth-oriented companies. I've seen the pressure on staff to consistently adjust their processes to adapt and change over and over again very rapidly. It's a real challenge for most businesses. My current company, Metronet, has grown about 150% in the last 2 years, which is about 50% over expectations. And couple that with the pandemic, which forced people to work from home or have their children homeschools. It turned our internet company from a luxury to a necessity for most people. So because of this, we as a company have had to focus on immediate change to scale for this kind of growth. My current portfolio is consistently larger than I have staff to assign it to, and other departments all have projects that they're working on individually outside of process improvement. So we're seeing this type of crazy growth all at once, and we're trying to make the best business decisions and keep our portfolios and our projects aligned with all of the changing business environment. So we know that change disrupts work, right? But in a growth company, change is just part of the culture. And so individuals can feel that there's no order to that change, that it's just being thrown upon them over and over and over again. So during our process, managing our portfolios, we must preserve this order. We must implement change in a way that embraces the change culture, but is orderly and systematic. So communication. So quick growth leads to siloed communication instead of unified collaboration. It just breeds communication problems. There's just no way around it. Things that were once communicated around a coffee pot or during a small group meeting is now lost in that larger group setting. Your departments, they split, tasks are reassigned, or move around between departments. People are promoted into new positions. So that closeness that was once just an everyday part of the culture is replaced with the unfamiliar. You've got new faces, new personalities, new ways of working, and that filters into that once close-knit company. And a lot of people aren't prepared for it. They don't even recognize that the culture is changing until several years down the line into this growth period. So quite frequently, the business expands to several corporate offices, or they add field offices. So the atmosphere where everyone knows everyone is replaced with the nameless teammates and new physical distance. In addition, historical company knowledge is lost during this time. Best practices are forgotten, or they're not sustained with the growth. Many times as we bring new people in and we start to train them, we find that there's no written documentation, or if there is written documentation, it's just severely outdated. And that adds another layer of overlooked history. If we can't look at past practices and learn our jobs the way they are today, or the way the person before us perform them, it's hard to move forward and make sure that we retain that historical knowledge. And on top of that, your management and your leadership assumes the knowledge transfer is taking place. And most don't even realize that it hasn't transferred. And how can it in just a mere 2 weeks of transition? So that adds just a whole layer of complexity on top of an already overwhelmed staff. So what is the key to breaking down silos? It's collaboration. What I find is that it's easy sometimes as getting all the right people in the same room. So you're creating that culture that is kind of went from that close-knit, we're going to share things around the coffee pot, to this to where we're all completely spread out and we're not having that collaboration anymore. So if you start reeling back in those people, bringing them into the same room, having these discussions again, you will find that lost history. It's just as important to have these work relationships cultivated and this information shared as it is in your personal life. If in your personal life, if you stop meeting with friends, stop seeing family, that the world just kind of goes on and you lose that closeness that you once had. Well, the same thing can happen in your work relationships. And it's important that we cultivate those so that it helps people feel more comfortable in sharing that information. And when they think of it, maybe outside the original meeting, they'll come to you and say, oh, I remembered this, or I wanted to add that, or this came up the other day and I forgot we've dealt with this before. So you want to build that collaboration, and you want your stakeholders and the people in the company to feel that you're unbiased, with that collaboration. So you're just facilitating the conversation. Your stakeholders, they have to feel unthreatened. You're not taking sides. And you must consistently be mindful of who's not in the room. Who do you need that isn't there? As you talk and you relay this company knowledge, who should you have in the room? Do you have the correct players? Do you need to add, or do you need to remove? So in a growing company, roles continually change. So you may have to remove people from an original project and add others. So your portfolios are constantly, your projects in your portfolio is constantly growing and evolving and changing along with the business as it grows, evolves, and it changes. So you may have to dig to really find out who has the historical knowledge and who is going to actually perform the process or perform the function as you roll out change. So processes. That's what this entire conference has been about, is process mining. So let's talk about processes. We know that they're your road to success. There are certain steps that have to be followed. If you've lost that historical knowledge, you have to go back. You've got to map the current processes. And during that time, you're going to identify, waste, and you're going to isolate communication barriers and categorize the duplicates or rework. And you're going to document all the steps and tasks performed to achieve that expected result. And it's the only way to really understand how to complete your project. You have to know where you're coming from to understand where you're going to. And I feel like this is also important in some IT-based solutions. I've seen many times where an IT project is scoped, all the software expectations are outlined, but you get into user testing or even deployment, and there's changes after changes after changes. And that's because we didn't actually map the manual steps before trying to automate them. We don't know where the information goes, who else uses the software. So it's important that we engage all the stakeholders in the reviewing processes, that we facilitate those cross-departmental conversations so that we know who else might be affected by this change, where our silent stakeholders are versus our engaged stakeholders, our users versus those that are just going to be on the sidelines and benefit. And then once we decide what our current process is and we go forward with trying to implement that future state, you again have to engage all the stakeholders, make sure that they understand what kind of changes are coming down the line, what you're trying to accomplish, and ensure that you haven't forgotten a specific group or department or a task out of that future state solution. So once you have mapped your processes, you're well into trying to figure out what you're going to implement and change. You still have to manage competing priorities. And in a growing company, it's extremely hard to do. So my suggestions are to hold regular stakeholder communication to keep the projects in the forefront, keep them moving forward, let them know where you are, talk about anything that might be a stumbling block. In addition to that, you need to hold executive and champion meetings regularly to garner continuous support and communicate those wins and losses that you're having. Let them know how far you are into the project, and because you may be at a point of no return and they may not know it. You want to make sure that those conversations that they're having outside of your project conversation or your portfolios, they understand where you are in the steps. And then you also need to communicate those future needs that you have so that we can plan ahead. We need to ensure there's clarity of expectations for each project and also the savings, and make sure that those savings are classified correctly. Do we have hours saved? Do we have overall cost savings? Is it just a risk mitigation? And understand that risk mitigation can be one of the harder savings to quantify, and it might be one of the harder projects to get pushed through. If it's something that hasn't happened and we're just mitigating that risk before it happens, that can be a little bit of a harder sell, and you have to be prepared for that as a project manager and also as a portfolio manager. So I think the most important, though, is to make sure that all your projects are tied to a business case. Do you know what the company is trying to accomplish for the year, and are you focused on those items? Are you tying all your projects back to what's most important for that C-suite? Understand that it's quite common for projects to get pushed back or tabled in a growing company. The fiscal year is long. The goals that were set fourth quarter of the previous year may have changed drastically with the changing business climate. We've identified new threats, or we've had new opportunities, and they may take priority over your earlier projects. So that conversation that you've had up until that point about with your stakeholders, with your executives and champions, are going to be that much more important in a growing company, so that you can make sure that you always have the temperature, you understand where we are, where we're going, and what they are going to need from you going forward. And just remember that if you're faced with opposition, ask for reconsideration later, maybe in the following quarter, or maybe you need to go back and restate the business case and make it stronger for the new priorities, and then ask for a steering committee representation once you can finalize that. There are times, though, that you are going to have to go back to the drawing board. There are tons of different changes that come through in a growing company. There is additional changes to scope, methodology, and personnel that might happen, because there are times when you think you've scoped something, you believe you're on the right path, you start to map out the process, and you realize the scope is not correct. And you're going to have to go back to the drawing board, and you're going to have to restate that. You may at that time have to restate the business case. You may have to go back in front of the executives and garner some more support. You may not have had enough in the budget. You may have been focused on the wrong KPI. Methodology. Sometimes you'll find during the measurement stage or even the define stage that you were going to do this as a lean project and Six Sigma fits better, or you thought, well, I'll do waterfall on this, but you find agile is really the way that you need to go, and you need to release that in smaller iterations. It isn't always obvious at the beginning of a project. So you're going to be mindful of the fact that you may have to change the way you're approaching the project. And then personnel. In a growing company, there is a high likelihood of something happening. You will lose resources to other projects and priorities because of the sheer magnitude of work that needs to be accomplished. Or as stated earlier, roles will change. There's movement on and off your team, on and off your stakeholders list, and you can even have movement at the executive and steering committee level. So you need to find ways to profit from the change. I know that sounds crazy, but you've got to turn this to your advantage. Turn the negative into a positive. Encourage your team to look at as the challenges as opportunities. Do something even greater than what you previously imagined with that project. And just don't give up. So change. We've managed all their priorities. We've worked we're starting on the implementation stage, and we're passing this over to the new stakeholders. We're giving them what we believe they want, and we have to move them to accept the change. So a lot of you have probably already seen this model in some form or another. However, I feel like it's really relevant in today's time. We've got COVID, people working from home, virtual everything. Even our home lives have been in a consistent state of change for over a year now. We've been inundated with change everywhere. We can't buy groceries the same way. We can't go out to eat. We weren't going to the movies. Everything changed all at once worldwide. So you couple that with a company that's growing at the rate of speed that ours is growing, and you have a recipe for an implosion. You have to balance that change because it adds that other layer of challenges to in a normal individual. The cycle in a growing business is continuous. The changes are more rapidly rolled out and deployed, more so than in just a normal or declining business environment. And it feels like it's change after change after change after change. So how do you make that change stick? How do you, right? You've got to give good tools to your teams. You have to make sure that when it's time to change over to the department that's going to take the end result of your project and continue to implement it, that they have good documentation for reference, that they have the tools that they need to be successful in this implementation. And you also have to follow through to strengthen that case for transition. And think about it this way. If you start presenting good documentation at the end of your project, when you're doing that changeover, when you're putting that control plan into place, and you say, here's your training documents, here's how this new software or this new app is supposed to act, and so on, that gives them something that they can build off of. That the next iteration, the next change, they said, oh, it was so easy to train on this one, we need to make sure we have training documents for the next one, or we need to make sure we map the process ourselves. So you want to be the leader when it comes to that follow-through documentation. You want to make sure you have a good control plan that defines standards and quantitative measurements of the project. You want to make sure that it assigns process owners for all the different processes contained in that project, and it gives the parties instructions on corrective actions to take when the standards are not met. This important piece of the project frees the new team up to act when needed. Those process owners have the power to make the real change. And I think that's important, that they feel empowered. They don't feel like that change is thrust upon them, that change is actually something positive, something they can control, something they can own and be successful at. Finally, to make the change stick, I think you really need to have good follow-up. I really can't stress this enough. All of the work can be lost in the next growth spurt without follow-up. And you need to review the standards, make sure that any KPIs that you set or any measurements are still where you want them a month down the line, 2 months down the line, you know, the next quarter. And make sure that the documentation that you gave them was thorough, that they don't need to have changes to it, that they don't feel like the process is broken or the app didn't get user tested enough and there's other problems that have crept up that you weren't made aware. And again, that goes back to that, you know, collaboration and communication we talked about earlier, building those relationships with your stakeholders at the very beginning, so that if you do roll out a change and it's not what they expected or something that they can't handle, or if it's got some quirks that need to be taken care of, and we know that happens sometimes, that they have an open line of communication to you. And that can also be outlined clearly in the control plan, which is extremely helpful also. So next thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to celebrate those successes. As projects are completed, take the time to celebrate, no matter the size or the scope. Thanking your team and stakeholders for a job well done helps to ease the pressure of the change itself. Change in a growing company has to be the norm. It's just the nature of growth. Growth is change. So you have to build those relationships, encourage others to bring their ideas forward, create this atmosphere where your associates are rewarded for initiating change or thinking strategically. Put change in such a positive light that they're excited to bring things to you. They want to celebrate the ideas, not just the successes. And it goes a long way to make sure that the change sticks in the company, that the whole company embraces change, that you do not get that change apathy, that they understand that we're all working towards one goal and that we want to be successful, and that yes, there's a lot of change and there's a lot of different competing priorities in the company. But we're all in this together, and celebrating those successes helps to reinforce just that we're all in this together, that we can do this together. So for the takeaways today, we've talked about, you know, breaking down silos, the power of the process, managing, you know, the competing priorities and making real change. You know, growth pushes a company. As Josette said earlier, it shines a light on all the hidden dark places that are broken by poor processes and siloed communication. It puts pressure on any weakness and can cause a company to just virtually implode. Frustrated employees will quit. Change will continue but not be permanent. And burnout will result in apathy. And you'll see this across the company. You'll see, you know, people coming, instead of being promoted, they're leaving. You have processes and new improvements being rolled out, but people aren't following them anymore. You'll go to do your quarterly follow-up, and no one's using your new app. And that is a result of a change apathy, that feeling that I'm tired of change. So in a growing company, you've got to be very, very mindful of that. And if you want to have success with your portfolio, you have to find ways to ensure that all of your stakeholders are engaged and that they're excited about the change as much as you are. They're excited about finishing the projects and making work easier, and mapping the processes and having something to go forward, something that they can pass off as they roll up the ladder, and their successor then gets that process and they feel like they can transfer that knowledge. So managing a portfolio, to implement quick, effective, and sustainable change is the only way for a growing company to truly survive. It's up to you to balance the needs of the stakeholders, the competing business priorities, and manage the change appropriately to ensure success of your portfolio. I want to thank everyone for participating today. I look forward to your questions, and I will pass this over to Josette. Thank you.
Jean, thank you very much for that great coverage and journey of change, of the inevitable change that we deal with in our organizations, especially if you have a growing organization. One of the things that I like to use is that there are only two states on everything in life or in organizations, that you're either growing or you're dying, and both of those stages are actually periods of change, and there's no such thing as a plateau. If you're ever thinking you're on a plateau, you're actually just dying and you don't know yet. So I'm gonna ask you, I don't see your camera right now, Jean. Go ahead and bring your camera back up, and I'm gonna ask you the first question related to just the stages of change that you're going in your own organization. So for those of us who don't know as much about Metronet and what the journey has been like for you, what does it look like in the last 2 to 3 years? What has happened in the marketplace?
Well, we are a company that provides direct fiber to the home. So we provide a service where you can actually receive 1 gigabyte up and 1 gigabyte down of Wi-Fi. So you can imagine in our post-COVID state how important it is to have a fast internet. We already had a strong business plan. Our executives were already really growth focused beforehand. In the past 5 years, it's just been exponential. But we have outgrown a building. We have moved. We've got 2 large corporate buildings. We're remodeling consistently. I've been in, I believe, 5 different offices in the 2 years I've been with the company, just because in 2 different buildings, just because we have been growing so rapidly. We're outgrowing our software tools. We're outgrowing our processes. It's been very, very interesting. In fact, the department that I'm in has went from 2 people to 7 just in the last year.
Wow, that is a lot of change. You know, I was in infrastructure nearly a decade ago. I was a leader in an infrastructure company, and you know, very familiar with kind of the business that you have, because you know we're there competing with the Google Fibers of the world back then, and the AT&T Gigas, and everything, and all these regional organizations, right, who are providing this type of services that you're talking about. It's incredibly fast. It's incredibly competitive. Customer requirements and demands, you know, shift, and technologies change. It's a bit chaotic, right? And I can imagine that provides a great context, I think, for the experience you have shared with us. So you know, you're really flying this aircraft, and you're trying to redesign it at the same time, right? So that you find you have a smooth landing somewhere, you don't know where. And you know, one of the project leaders I worked with before in that industry felt that it was more like a locomotive going 100 miles per hour, and cash was flying out because you couldn't catch it, because there was plenty of opportunity, but it's like the mistakes were so basic, you know, and the process improvement people are kind of, you know, sent to the sidelines, because you know I'm too busy executing here to listen about your process improvement or a way of getting things better. So it's very hard to break out of that cycle, right? Because you sell, build. How do you fit in process improvement? How do you make people slow down and say, this is worth slowing down for? how do you do that in your organization? Curious about any tips that you have for other people on how to do that.
Well, for one, we have a very supportive executive steering committee. They are interested in our projects. We present every month. They talk process improvement. They have incorporated process improvement goals in our corporate business plans that they roll out company-wide each year. So it pushes us as a company to think more process improvement minded, and it kind of breaks down those barriers. When you have, the president or your CFO talking about process improvement, then you're going to remember process improvement. And then I think it's also that conversation we talked about, in the presentation, breaking down those silos, starting to bring people together, gaining their trust, understand that, process improvement is here to help you. And I understand it feels like you can't slow down, but if you don't give me a chance to help you, then you'll never get there.
This is such great insight, and really you should say, I'm so blessed for having an executive team that actually has this vision, because that is a
Mhm.
gift, really. A lot of leaders don't have a background in process improvement, and some look at it as kind of a bureaucratic work, and it's not really the work that we need to do. So you're fortunate to be in an organization that has that value system and understanding, probably through their own previous experiences. And the way you really accelerate innovation is you scale it with excellence, which seems to be the way that you're doing it, which is fantastic. It's really great to hear. Now, in this environment, despite the fact that you have the support, that you have I would say, the mindset of process improvement, it is still tricky to decide when to slow down things so that we can make them better, right? Because the pressures of execution are tremendous, and the expectations of customers and timelines are never long enough to get things done. So tell us a little bit about the overall process. As you think about portfolio management, what is the overall process that you follow to identify, prioritize really what needs to be executed that will create the most value for the organization? How does that process work for you?
I think I first go through and look at, how can I align our projects with the company goals. That's first, and then I also rely on my team a lot, and play to their skill set. So each person on my team is just just a little bit of a different view and skill set. And so in order for us to be able to determine which projects might be able to be rolled out quickly and which ones need to be slowed down, I kind of go back to my staff and I say, okay, your skill set is data analytics. I have this project that's going to be working with reporting. They need dashboards. We're going to do this. I've got your background is engineering, so I'm going to have you work with the fiber engineering team, and so on. And so then I break those down into those priorities. And then once we start getting into the process mapping, we have a better idea of those departmental goals that feed into those projects. So we may, in fact, this morning something changed. We need a certain server to give us data, and we found that that's been pushed off just a little bit. So then that is again a changing company goal. It has to do with that team that builds the server, or that bringing the data into the server to build it, has been pulled off for another unexpected priority. So we're constantly evolving, and I said, okay, that's fine. Let's slow this one down. But since we're slowing this one down, let's go ahead and this one that we're just kind of working on the side. Let's move it to the forefront and push it, because it'll still meet some of our business goals for the year. So there's not a one size fits all answer, unfortunately. It kind of depends on what you have in your portfolio, who you have on your team, and what changes in the business environment during that time. And we are constantly moving things around and constantly reevaluating and getting back with the teams and making sure that we have that communication if we do have to slow down or we do have to adjust.
Very well, very well. Thank you for that. Now, you have very different types and complex types of processes in an organization like that. You're talking about fiber engineering design and reviews, and then you have installation, layouts, and planning, and all these things have to kind of work end to end, which provides several challenges. You have processes that feel like a manufacturing process, and other processes that are much more like in the transactional nature. So I'm curious about technology and the role that technology and maybe some technologies like RPA or process mining or artificial intelligence or natural language processing, any of the technologies, the digital technologies that we have been talking about. I'm curious if you have experimented with any of those, if you're doing trials or if you're deploying some of those. What role does technology play in your business?
Well, I think within the last couple of years, we've, as a company, come to the conclusion that the tools that we used, 5-6 years ago are not adequate now. So we are moving towards a lot of AI. We're bringing in a few platforms to start allowing more citizen development. We're working with our, subject matter experts to determine what their needs might be going forward. I know that we're gonna be deploying some new softwares that have better REST APIs than we had before, and we are kind of breaking the mold. And I know that going forward, we're looking at some different process mapping tools, something a little bit more interactive that we can pass to the teams and put those teams in charge of it, so it's not all on process improvement anymore. And I think that we have used a lot of our own development in the past, and we're probably getting to the point where we're going to start using some additional tools that are out there in the marketplace. Interestingly enough, though, this is a niche. There's not, a wide variety of out of the box solutions for what we do, and we're a pioneer somewhat with the fiber to the home. So we're having to think a little differently, but we are finding some interesting solutions. And we've been using a lot of analytical software, and I expect that just to increase over the next year.
That's terrific, Jean. So last question is that for those who may be feeling overwhelmed right now by the changes in the world and specifically the changes in their workplace and organizations, that feel that everything is happening so fast and they're losing control of everything, and that that the future is uncertain and rapidly changing, what would be like one or two pieces of advice you have for them as leaders to start getting control back to a certain extent of the direction of this growth?
You need to rethink change and facilitate it from the perspective of the whole organization. Make sure that you're bringing people together, that you're communicating what the end result is, where you're trying to go, because a lot of times change feels like it's just for change's sake. But if they understand what your end is, if you start with the end in mind, I know we've heard that before, but if you start with the end in mind and you communicate that, it helps it helps your associates know why you're asking or why you're changing things, or why can't they, it's good enough, I can do it, the way it is now, but it's not good enough and you can't.
Jane, fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and the story of growth and the continued success, I hope, for the company. We really appreciate you sharing your expertise with our global audience today.
All right, thank you for having me. Bye.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Jean Reising from Metronet with us, and a real interesting view at adapting to change in this very fast moving environment that we all have been in, and especially in a company and in a market that she's serving right now that is changing at the pace of exponential technology. Now, this is our last session for today. So I want to thank everybody for participating today. Lots of great questions, engaging heavily throughout these four presentations, and remind you that you can continue to pose questions. If we didn't get a chance to answer your questions, you can post the questions on the LinkedIn posting that we have for the conference. You can certainly connect with the speakers. You can communicate with them as well through that LinkedIn posting. We're going to be back tomorrow for our final day, so I'm going to give you a quick preview here of what's waiting for us tomorrow. We're going to kick off with the Vice President of Operational Excellence for Global Containers Terminals in Canada. And he's going to be talking about reliability-centered maintenance and asset connectivity. So we're going to be talking about IoT here. We're going to be talking about technologies related to heavy asset management and reliability. So a really interesting, unique perspective on that heavy asset industry. We're going to follow that up with a session from China with Chuck Dai, who is the head of BSAF's digitalization and smart manufacturing in the Greater China region. And Chuck has presented with us before and has incredible insights about what's going on in the world of chemistry at BASF facilities and how they're using exponential technologies on the processing industry. A nice follow-up to the previous discussion on heavy assets. Then we're gonna move on to a presentation from Omar Murad from the ECC Group Systems, and we're gonna finish the day with Martin Kunz, who is the head of process excellence for Linde, and he's gonna talk about process mining and the digital twin factory in the business. So for leaders of improvement, innovation, and technology acceleration in 4 distinct industries tomorrow. Maybe the first 2 related or have assets, one a little bit more on transportation, the second one on chemicals. But again, cross-industry perspectives and varieties of leaders who are implementing technology to accelerate excellence and innovation in their organizations. So thank you again for being with us today. I look forward to seeing you all again tomorrow at this same channel and go over these presentations together. Whatever you are in the world, have a good rest of your day.